everyone. I'm Nicolette, an SGDA officer and UCLA student, and I'll be moderating this year's narrative design talk. The narrative designer speaking with us today is Andrea Saravia Perez, and we just had the pleasure of hearing them talk about Small Loan Studio. I actually spoke with Andrea last year during the 2023 narrative panel, and I want to let you know that we'll be reusing some of the questions we asked last year, so feel free to take the discussion wherever you'd like now that we have a new opportunity to focus on your experience. So for the first 30 minutes, we'll start with prepared questions. Then in the last 20 minutes, I'll ask from audience questions. Uh, and so to start, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself and specifically your experience with writing for games?
Sure. I love that there's kind of like the Billie Eilish Vogue interview where like she would have one in 2017, 2018, and then you can like see her like with different hairstyles. And it's like, yeah, I chopped my hair since last year. And since then, yeah, my name's Andrea Saravia. I'm currently a co-founder at Small Studio. I'm also a narrative lead at Anima Interactive, which is an indie studio that's making socially conscious projects. I've also been a writer for Civilization 7, Way Studios, and a couple of other like NDA projects as well. And happy to answer to like all things narrative. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, I usually start with like a first question, but I want to learn more about Anima Studio, Anima Interactive, I think you said it was. And you said you were making socially conscious games, so I just wanted to see if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
It's under NDA. However, I
Ah,
can say that Anima right now, well, actually, it just wrapped up, but Anima in the past has done the Just Play Jam, and the Just Play Jam is basically just kind of like a game jam that usually has kind of like a motif regarding like social change. So I think the first one was about like justice. The most recent one was about climate change, and then they do compensate like winners. So I really recommend just kind of like because a lot of people give advice from a good place, but like, just saying, just go to a game jam doesn't really work anymore. But I can recommend just kind of like there are game jams that have rewards, compensations, and when you can like basically quantify the outcome of your game jam in like how much your team won, how many assets, or like did you play tests, like when you can quantify like metrics from any project that you complete, that's going to be like very important and like relevant in any experience. But yeah, I wish I could talk more about anime, but it's just kind of like under NDA, like all things in this industry.
yeah, I actually saw the climate change game jam and was interested in working on it, but I was working on a Palestinian project at the same time. But I was wondering if actually is the climate change jam under NDA? Are you able to talk about that?
I'm not directly like in that part of anime. I do know that it's
Mm.
just kind of like it just wrapped up. But that's kind of like again like I like from like that part. Yeah, I just know that it wrapped up pretty much.
Yeah. All right, back to the narrative design. But okay, so narrative design has a lot of meanings for a lot of people, ranging from writing dialogue and characters to advocating for the story and sometimes even level design. How would
Mhm.
you describe what you do as a writer?
What I would describe that as a writer, well, the responsibilities between a writer and narrative designer are
Yeah.
different depending on like company roles. Um, yes, hello, thank you. And so basically what in narrative design, what I know that CDPR has this standard, which is narrative designers focus on the implementation of content, and just kind of like the more technical side of like storytelling. Whereas like people that are game writers, they focus more on the story, just kind of like on what you associate, almost with like more creative writing. And it's something that in games, companies would used to bring writers from Hollywood rather than like from games, because again, like narrative design is, I feel like we forget just how much of a baby discipline it is, right? Like it really is a baby. But yeah, that's kind of like the difference. Like as a writer for like just kind of like Fireside, is like a lot of it is under NDA, but I did just kind of like do a lot of research. I did do a lot of implementation. So again, like you can have a role in the game industry. It's not often going to reflect your responsibilities because I wasn't just writing. I was also like in a proprietary game engine implementing narrative content. Um, so yeah, I mean that's like the we don't really have a standard in narrative design either, but universally it's acknowledged that like game writing is more of like, barks, dialogue, maybe cinematics, but like sometimes that's two different departments, like like scripts, character spreadsheet, character like stories, lore, world building. That's game writing. Narrative design is actually like going into the game engine and implementing that and just making sure that like the story doesn't have dissonance. Because for example, like if you're having like a character that has just been like injured, then you don't want the voice line to sound the same. Like you want it to like reflect that condition. So does that answer the question a little bit?
Yeah, that does. And it's good clarifying for a lot of us who don't know the distinguishing term between game writing and narrative design.
Mhm.
And you also brought up technical narrative design, which I am aware is kind of like the using narrative tools in order to implement a lot of the game writing. What kind of skills do you need to be able to use narrative tools, and what narrative tools do you prefer to use?
I think that a misconception is that you need to know a lot about programming. When you start looking at programming like it's Legos, it makes it a lot easier. No, I mean like it's more like an education platform, but Scratch, for example, is a platform where like you can code, like kind of like animation shorts. But again, like it visualizes the code as if it was a Lego. So it's kind of like to get people, like kids specifically, interested like in just coding and programming. But RenPy, for example, REN apostrophe PY, it has 10-minute tutorials. Like Python is just very accessible where like I was able to do commissions for clients, like implementing and doing programming for them just because like you watch a 10-minute video, which obviously is like different from like there's more robust game engines like Unreal Engine that blueprints can have tutorials that last 30 hours, and they're very thorough because again like there's so many possibilities in these game engines. But a skill set, sorry, that I recommend is just kind of like knowing enough about programming as if it was a third language. Like you're not gonna talk about it, you're not gonna, like have a career in it, but you can understand it. You can hear conversations about it. So again, like if you show me like a piece of code, like I'll be able to like know the pieces. But I might not be able to like, just kind of like go into it and then like, engineer like a very complex like feature. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's good for you to hear you say that since I know that a lot of narrative people don't have a background in programming, and it's really not that a lot of these tools make it a lot easier. So people should not be so afraid. I actually had a specific question. Like if you, I know that RenPy is good for like doing it all in RenPy, but you work specifically with Unity. I know a lot of other students work with Unity. Do you know any good tools for narrative?
Yarn Spinner is like an industry standard in Unity, and I'm surprised that more courses are not offering. Like, there's a lot of like narrative design courses, and I feel like they should like that is like again like the closest we have to an industry standard is like Ink, Yarn Spinner, um, and others companies that use RDC Draft. Other companies use proprietary tools, but again, like documentation for Ink is free. It is free as well, and it has a Unity plugin. There's Dialog Manager as well. There's Yarn Spinner. Yarn Spinner, I think, is $30 now, but it used to be free. So I'm not sure what happened there. But another thing too, it's like even though like it's like a tool that a lot of people already use, Twine. Like Twine, once you really study like the documentation of it, you can start like playing around with the UI. I saw somebody make like an adaptation of Disco Elysium with like the UI identical, and it was done entirely on Twine. Because again, like these tools are accessible. YouTube is free. The videos are there in English, in Spanish, in Italian. Like there is documentation about like these different narrative tools, which again have plugins for not just like like there's blueprints for Unreal, Yarn Spinner, Ink. Like I believe some of them even have plugins for Godot. These are all like pretty accessible in my opinion.
Yeah, I gotta check out Ink myself because I've been using Yarn Spinner, but that there's only so much documentation on the implementation of your own assets with Yarn Spinner. Oh, and actually, it is free through well, it's $30 on the website, but if you get it through Unity, then it's free as a plugin. Um, but let me see. We're gonna steer off into a little bit of a different direction. Um, ah, so, how does gameplay affect how you create narrative experiences for your games? Do you usually write Do you normally see that the story is written and then the gameplay is written around the story, or like stories written around the gameplay?
It depends on the project. I don't want to have those legalese responses necessarily. However, for example, like um I've been brought on like into projects like at different stages. So like, there were times where like I was brought on and there was already like a robust story like idea and I just had to perfect it a little bit. I was brought up during like, production, like in the middle of it. So like when a game is already like, full steam ahead in production, then what helps me know like the different tools that I have to like convey a story is just getting into the current build, the most recent one, and then seeing, okay, like where can I add a little bit of story here? Because for example, like you might be exploring a level and then you notice that there's like an office. But then maybe everything's tidy. But what if we were able to ask an artist, like, hey, can you move this chair a little bit, have a sandwich so that it looks like somebody had to like rush to a meeting? Like being able to just experience the game and come up with ideas on like how to enhance not just like story in parks but also environmental storytelling. Is there kind of like a voice line or a narration? Like again, like I narrative design is very collaborative, and how these collaborations function varies from studio, because like some of studios have like very closed communications, others do like encourage like more cross collaboration and stuff. um but that's just like a few examples on like how I would like navigate it, where again like there's times where like I'm brought on like to come up with the story and then the gameplay follows. Other times like I've had to like inform myself about the gameplay. But something that's very key that I learned in one of my courses is like we need to start seeing things as like a tango and not like a competition, right? Like you are dancing in pure coordination with the gameplay engineers. They're not trying to like do a thing that the narrative cannot do, or like like it's not supposed to be a rivalry, which sounds silly, but you'd be surprised like how many companies might think that, for example, like okay, that's a good idea that the narrative has, but gameplay wise it doesn't make sense. And it's true, because of ludonarrative dissonance that you want to avoid all the time.
Yeah, this is really good advice since I've worked on teams where I feel like it's often a battle between different departments. So it's good to have this advice that it's important to just make sure that we are taking account for everyone's, since everyone has touched different parts of the game, that everyone's opinion is taken into account. Um, Actually, when you are bringing up these like story ideas, like you said, where if you move the chair slightly, how would you argue that this is important for the game overall? Because I know it will add a lot of work to other people's plates.
Yeah, that's another thing where like I really recommend just kind of like immersing yourself in a collaborative experience in whatever, like it can be in a game jam, it can be in a volunteer studio, but really immerse yourself in an environment where you're full with like a bunch of constraints and a bunch of dependencies, because then you'll realize that you can't just like, hey, it'd be cool if we had this NPC. Okay, but then who's doing the concept art for the NPC? Who's doing the voiceover acting? Who's implementing all of that content? Like who is doing the animations? Who's doing the expressions? When you realize sort of like how expensive it can be labor wise, that's like a good experiment, right? I'll be honest, when I was doing like environmental storytelling for a project, I just kind of like got a message from like the environment artist, like, hey Andrea, can you get into the channel real quick? I want to ask you for like some story ideas. And I'm like, cool. And I just spoke and came up with ideas on the fly. But again, like that was just kind of like the cross collaboration environment that we were in that allowed for that to come through. First, like other studios, like when it's like at a larger scale, like you may have like a meeting with the leads first, and then with just kind of like like all of the departments like having a meeting between like environment art and also like narrative to like see, hey, how can we kind of like enhance this.
Yeah, thank you for that. Um, as someone who comes from more of a writing background than like with a very base programming background, how do you organize all of the variables like voices and like changing of scene when you are making like when you're managing the tools, like the narrative tools? How do you stay organized?
My God, naming conventions. From the start, like you need to really like talk to your team about like what are the naming conventions going to be, sort of like how is each file going to be named, and is there going to be like a number to just be able to like navigate that, to like be able to identify them, right? Because like if you, for example, just have kind of like
I don't know, expression one, expression two, but you don't know what one and two means, then maybe you may want to have like a different convention, like expression sad, expression angry, right? So it's very much like, again, just kind of like naming conventions that should happen like very much in the beginning, and like, in a cross, just really be in touch with, like, your programmers, and like just make sure that you make that they know how to make your life easier and you know how to make it easier on them.
Also, where do you find narrative, technical narrative or just narrative design jobs? Because I know they're hard to come by.
Mm, let's see. I think I was subscribed to 17 job boards. I have a list somewhere, but the ones that I know that are very active, there's Grackle HQ, there's Games Job Direct, remote game jobs, work with indies, and just being able to like filter the notifications really helps. Oftentimes with like technical narrative, obviously like you may see technical designer, but rarely do you see narrative. So the truth is that, again, it goes back to like just kind of like I was a writer that was doing technical narrative design. You have to read the job description and see like, wait, this role says that it's for a narrative designer, but the responsibilities, it's giving technical narrative designer, right? So like it's not that there's not a lot of narrative jobs, and even less so like technical narrative design, though there are more than like writer jobs, I think, right now. For like just kind of like for people trying to break in, that is. But yeah, it's all in the job description, and just kind of like you really need to know like your role and your responsibilities very well, which is difficult when like we're in an industry that's not very standardized, right? So really, like I just recommend just kind of like making your own job by like just freelancing as well. Like there's platforms like I use Coffee a lot, where like you can sort of like have your services uploaded. LinkedIn also has it. I think there's Gamers Home that is like, specifically for game developers, where you can go to the platform, set up your services, and say like, hey, my name is Nicolette. I'm a technical narrative designer, and these are like the services that I offer. Like I offer implementation in Unity. I offer like, like debugging. Like what? I mean, that's more of a QA, but just be able to like make that gig that is paid, so that you have client work, and then like that client work is how you can show to others that you have been in a capacity where like you had to work under constraints, you were compensated for your work, and you were with somebody within the industry.
Awesome. This is really helpful advice for someone who's afraid that we won't get a job, but but
You
then
make your own
also
job.
yeah, yeah, the freelance it's a really good point. I have to go look and see on like those platforms to see how people would advertise themselves to show that they are prominent like able to write well. But I can probably see on those platforms how people do it. I had one question. Oh, it was important. Oh, in an industry where it's not very standardized, like what a narrative design or a technical game design type job, I guess it can be grouped in, um, is how do we like prepare a resume or a website that's gonna look good for all of these types of positions?
Well, you have to make a resume for each position is like the not so fun. Like I've seen people that are able to automate it, and like they have scripts. So like they would have scripts for like hundreds, even thousands of game companies, where again, like they just tailor it to the JD. So for example, like there's jobs for like quest design, where like you may want to just kind of like emphasis that like you've done quest design work, and maybe like, like link to your portfolios, like if you're like navigating a job process where like it's quest design, like maybe have your quest at the forefront of the portfolio, and have like your scripts, kind of like as a second and third entry, right? So it's a lot of work, and that's why again, like a good just kind of like it's like there's quality over quantity, right? So it's like first try to like network in a way that's not transactional, to find people in these companies that can vouch for you, because that means that there's somebody who has worked with you before, or has just like had a coffee chat, and it's like, you know what, they're like a really great narrative designer, I'd love to work with them and get to know like what they're really like in the workforce. So by having those connections first, it's kind of like a good start, and then like try to apply to like roles that you know somebody that can vouch for you, not necessarily give a referral, even better if they do, but just somebody that when the company's like, should we go with her or with this other person? They're like, no, you gotta go with Nicola. Like, you gotta go with this person, right? Um, that's at least how I would navigate it. And again, like, I've become really good at like tailoring my resumes by like having them go through jobscan.com, which is like, makes it ATS friendly so that it doesn't get lost into the void. Making sure that, again, like, you read the job description thoroughly, because sometimes people send like a game writing portfolio or like a resume when really the job was demanding more of like a design experience, more level design maybe. Like, there's a lot of like overlap sometimes between disciplines, and you want to be able to like take note of that, and just kind of like, again, like, cater it so that they know that you're the perfect fit, and not like, okay, she knows game writing, but so does everybody else. Like, who's a game writer that's good for this company, right? Because a game writer that has history knowledge may work for, like, your Ubisofts and your Fireatses, but perhaps that person, it's not the best fit for, I don't know, like EA working on The Sims. You may want somebody that has more live Sims and live ops experience, like doing that sort of like content that is like, ongoing.
Oh, that's a really good point, and also good advice for all of us to try to find the aspects of each of our games that would work, show the company that we have something to offer them specifically. Uh, and uh, I'll probably look through the questions, but I had one on the tip of my tongue. Actually, I'll see if I can. Maybe I'll ask one of the audience questions early, since there are quite a few. Oh, no, those are just comments. But there is one in on Discord. What aspects of creating a visual novel do you enjoy most, and how do you apply these in collaboration with other studios?
I just wanted to like give a shout out to that person because it was something that I was like emphasizing before, which is like, you need to know how to like ask questions. And I'm very vocal about like the visual novels that I've done, but not so much like, like my NDA stuff. Because again, like, that's when I've met with like other designers, it's like, you need to know like who you can ask for like information. So great on them for that. What I like about visual novels is that the mechanics, like, I like the player experience expectations of it. So every genre is going to have like player experience expectations. When you go to like an open world, like, you're like expecting narrative to just kind of like flourish in like the environment and the lore of the world, more so than like actually, like, or like, following quests. Like, there's that expectation, which, again, like, staples in the genre like really follow through. And that's kind of like how you have a game that succeeds in like a specific genre. With visual novels, people play a visual novel and they're fully expecting a lot of text already. And when you're somebody that has a lot of you have like many stories to tell, like, it can be difficult to like find a format that is within a scope that can just also justify being very wordy but interactive. Because, again, like, the Aurora's Express, like, even though I did sound design there, it had like 51,000 words, which may seem like a lot, but when you factor in that, I think 80 Days had either 800 or 500,000, like, Type Moon visual novels, or like in the 6 digits. Like, these are huge projects, but because the players are already wanting to see a story and experience it, like, you don't see like the player base that's like, oh, I'm just gonna skip the cutscenes kind of thing, right? So I like that disposition, that the player base is open and excited about story and narrative design already. And then my job is basically to just fulfill that expectation and like give them something new. So it's not a secret. What we did was like, the expectation for like, visual novels, not often, but a lot of the times, was around romance. And it's like, what if we like subvert that expectation and we bring you in for like a mystery cyber noir, experience, rather than one that's romance? Because, again, like, romance had been done like justice by a lot of other developers. Let's just try something new. And we did, and we were able to like, be able to like show it across like, the world. I think Sal, our producer, like showed it in Berlin. Like, it's amazing, like, being able to like see people like take the visual novel format, embrace the story in it, and then also just be able to like replay it and see just kind of like the different endings. Because, again, like, with stories, like, you want to make sure there's a lot of replayability. But we spent maybe like a month and a half on like the game, which I think was like maybe 30 or 40 minutes, and then had multiple endings. So again, like you can get a lot of story done and you're just typing. So that was a bit of a long answer, but basically I like that players are open to stories and I like telling stories, so it's a win-win for everybody involved.
I think every single game writer would absolutely agree with you, which is why I tend to like to stick to visual novels too. It's really fun. But also the subversion of the genre is what makes some of the best games, which is why I love Hospital Boyfriend. Shout out. Great game. Um, let's see. And also oh, their name is Peter, by the way. But they have one more question for you. Oh, they have a couple more, but a couple are bolded. Um, okay. Uh, They're asking, if you don't mind, can we go over an example of differences between narrative design and game writing? We went over that a little bit, but do you have anything that you wanted to expand on that?
Um, it's like it's some differences of narrative design and game writing. So
Mhm.
when I worked in like a game jam recently, with where it was we made a game called Dio, the Small Dragon, and so that was more game writing, where I basically wrote a script and then like sent it off to like programmers to like handle, so like hands off, like that is game writing. Where I was telling a story through just kind of like the dialogue, through like the different features, through like a script as well, because we had like I think a brief animatic. But when it comes to narrative design that I can speak on that I've done, I can't really say much. That's the irony of things. But if I were, for example, to like in our next project, just kind of like if we have a quest line regarding like just kind of with like a certain sequence, and that it's like unveiling mysteries that the player can like unlock in different ways. If I come up with that story and I'm the one that implements it rather than like another person, that is narrative design to me, because oftentimes implementation, sometimes a programmer, you can like be as good as possible with communication, but they may add a twist, or they may kind of like misinterpret like your direction, and then like you may have had an original intent with your story that does not come across or is not executed properly when you give it over to the programmer and they implement it in a way that just doesn't suit your vision. So when you yourself are actually like doing the implementation, that to me is like what narrative design is. Just kind of like again, you're in the build designing the narrative. Um, so I hope like that kind of like answers the question.
No, I think it definitely did. And they have like a continuation of this topic. Um, I'll ask that question. Would the former or narrative design
Mhm.
include implementation of branching narratives or lingering systematic outcomes like the ones we observe in RPGs and immersive simulations?
Yeah, it can be a little bit of both. Like the like for example, I would say that the permutations found in Hades is a good example of just kind of like procedurally generated, or not, sorry, that's on Procgen, but just kind of like narratives that sort of like are unveiled through like gameplay and stuff. Whereas like branching narratives, like that's more of like when you actually have kind of like a linear storytelling that just like branches off and like you're the one implementing it.
And then going on to Ryan's question, there are so many different ways to tell a story in the game. What are some of your favorite uses of narrative in games?
Some of my favorite uses of narrative in games, I would say that just when it really feels like the gameplay is married to the narrative. For example, like I can say like in unpacking, for example, where like again like it's a puzzle and like you're kind of it's cozy and like you are unveiling the story by just kind of like again interacting with the game. Um, let's see. I think that another way that I really like this story, it's currently in development and I've seen just kind of like snippets of it, but Dark Web Streamer, for example, is a procedurally generated, I think, roguelike sim where like you are a streamer for the dark web, and it has, I'm not sure if like this feature will make it into like the end game, but something that they were talking about in PAX Australia is that they have a feature where if you are streaming the game like on Twitch, then your Twitch chat becomes like NPCs in the game canonically. So it's like, so that use of narrative where it's procedurally generated and it's like the designers, humans, embedded so much story, and then through programming they're able to like have like the game respond to different permutations, where like when the game senses that there's kind of like like an ongoing thread on Twitch, then they can like have like storylines connect and nodes connect to like that, um where it's like you're writing a story and the story responding to you. That to me was a very cool way of like seeing technology and storytelling like merge. But again, like the specifically like the Twitch integration, I'm not sure, because again, like that's a project that's currently in development. But I do really like just kind of like the fact that it's procedurally generated, and whether you have the integration or not, like from what they're advertising, like it's very much like you feel like the game is responding to your inputs like a lot.
That's so cool. Wait, this is such an interesting way to make the player like actually have more influence over the story than having it make it seem like like choices. Like speaking of choices, I went to IGN Live a couple weekends ago, and I was playing a few games and had beautiful art, but a lot of the choices felt like the same thing over and over and over again, like kind of just like each bubble was like saying the same thing. But how do you avoid like not giving the player enough influence, or if you don't give them that much influence, like how does you make them feel like they have a lot of choice?
um it's like I know that in development, there's a term the golden path, which is basically that there's kind of like a sequence of events that is kind of like the first path that is completed in a build kind of, and it varies from studio to studio again. But I think like just having like a concrete golden path that you polish a lot, and then you may have like side quests here and there that you develop like as you like continue development. That's one way. Um, I think just kind of like having a lot of lore is another way to like really author the experience, because that's again like what you're talking about, just kind of like The Last of Us 2, where like you are experiencing like, or if you go to like the first game, like you're experiencing Joel's story, right? In a first person. So the angle that the story is shown through, if it's in first person, second person, like that's going to influence a little bit. I think that when you have a lot of like lore, like in Venba, which you might not think that Venba being a cooking game has a lot of lore, but that's a good way of like where like the core game loop is like like you are basically like making a dish, and like through the dish like you unlock like stories and stuff. Um, but then like it's very much like a controlled environment, but it immerses the player and like gives you agency, because like you are able to like control and like put the different order of like ingredients and stuff, and just kind of like make sure that everything's going well. But Venba doesn't really educate you on like their culture. They throw you into the culture, right? So it's like because with stories that have like these communities that oftentimes don't really get like a spotlight in like mainstream media, you have to like really have this like authored approach where like it's restrictive, but I never felt like too many constraints as a player, because again like I expected to just experience the story of Venba, and I did that as a player. And Venba was not teaching me like the character, like she was not teaching me about like her culture necessarily, like she was just experiencing it, she was just living in it, which I think is a reality for a lot of people who are like of marginalized communities, because like I do joke that like my most Colombian contribution to games is just kind of like preaching about coffee. Like this is a Greek frappe, by the way. It's really hot, so like just equal parts sugar, coffee, and then you froth it with warm water, and then a lot of cold milk. So that's a quick PSA. But even though like I do that, like I don't educate people on like sort of like how Colombia started, what Nueva Granada was. Like that's just not something I do on the regular. I just happen to have been born in that country. So when stories just kind of like have that predisposition of like there's this lore that the play in this like world that the player is experiencing, where you don't really educate them, then I think that's a way where you can have like that authored approach, because you're just focused on experiencing the story of the main character, regardless of like whether it's a culture that's like familiar or not. You're not focusing on the open world aspect. Does that make sense?
Yeah, how have you personally written like about your culture within the characters that you've been able to write for?
Let's see. It's been a while since I last did it, but I think that taking inspiration from like my family members and then like having like a couple of snippets embedded into the characters that I've written was like a good way. Because there's a lot of like when writing dialogue for like Latin American characters, there's certain tendencies that are very common regardless of the country you're from. So I would have a script a couple of years ago where I would have like a character saying like, do you know where you know the thing, like the thing, like that's something that like I was guilty of, and then also like my dad would like say it all the time to my mom, so like I just kind of like got that experience and like try to like implement it into like a game where again like it's not like I'm not making arepas in the game or something. I'm just sort of like adding like those like little snippets of quotidian life into the dialogue really. But there's other ways to like show it, but again like it's more of like when you're designing a game that's intentionally about that culture, then like I think that that's like a pretty good blueprint of that.
Yeah. It reminds me that I have to go and play Venba. And there was also Ryan in the chat saying, reminder to play Unpacking. So thank you for all of these good game reminders. Um, oh, and Parker, actually, this isn't fully a question, but this is a good point to bring up. When you're um, making a game that's surrounding like a marginalized culture,
Mhm.
like how much player choice should be compromised in order to like I don't know, like how much? I think that's just something to consider, I guess.
Oh, it's I think like there's just kind of like common sense, and like regardless of like the game, I think that you should always have a consultant on board or somebody that has first-hand experience, because like a lot of people would like voice just kind of like how like again like it really much depends on the character, but you don't want how do I say, you wouldn't want harm necessarily like to come to like the character because they're of a marginalized community. Like there's times where like there's games that like display that, but I feel like it's a good rule of thumb to like just decrease the harm that can be done to that character as much as possible. It all depends again like on the genre. Like if you're doing a fighting game, like there's so much you can do, right? Um but I would say like just kind of like being able to like author like the dialogue options in ways that are authentic, and again like having the copy be like reviewed by somebody who's like belonging to that group is a good rule of thumb, because when you already have like the choices authored by people of that community, then that already like decreases like the options of like somebody maybe like I don't know like using a slur or something like in the game, you know what I mean? Like again like that's just kind of like really just use common sense, bring a consultant, and everything should be fine.
Um, if you had to like I this is just because I'm reading about the deaf community in my own capstone right now. If you were to write about or have like the discussion of discrimination in a game, I know you said to stay away from harm of the character in general. Like
Mhm.
how would you like write about that experience? Like
Well,
um
discrimination, it all depend. Like, every country kind of like manifests differently. Because, for example, like one of my jobs before, like I broke into games per se was like, in basically a call center in Florida, and specifically the um not Latin American part of Florida. So of course I got a lot of colorful callers during my time, but I also know that that's just kind of like the community that I was exposed to, because for example like if you go to like say California or like the West Coast, like the microaggressions will be more of like minority passing by and then like somebody like clutching like their bag or something, like they're more subtle, so like you can absolutely like show discrimination and just kind of like in a way that reflects lived experience and that is just kind of like more common, because again like um K crimes happen, like that's just a reality, of course. And if that's something that you want to show in your game, like again like definitely like get some consultancy to like go that make sure that you're going about it in like a way that is similar to real life. But generally speaking, most people are going to like experience it just kind of like in a more, even like in a workplace of like touching like somebody's hair and just like, oh my god, I love it, and it's like, who gave you the right to like touch that woman's curls?
No, this is really good advice. Thank you so much for being specific on that. And since we don't have much time left, I want to get to the last bit of audience questions here. Um, okay, Parker also asked, I've been longing to ask about the best practices for incorporating real world problems in game narrative, whether or not we're adapting it to a fantastical or sci-fi setting. Hopefully that makes sense. I think maybe I could reword that like a little bit.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I would say that always avoid trying to like, make trauma porn whenever you're like talking about like a social subject in general. But I would say like if you do want to adapt it into like, a fantasy format, then again, like um rely on the world that you're building and just kind of like on the lore that you're coming up with and the different like societies and civilizations that you're coming up with. Because again, like I feel like with fantasy what's interesting is like it's a bit of a joke, but everybody will tell you like, okay, like whenever I play a fantasy, I know like that fictional country is the Germany of this game, that fictional country is like the UK of this game. I don't even have to say which one I'm referring to, but that's just kind of like there's always like those worlds that are gonna have like those parallels. So like again, like try to play in a sandbox of like the parallels while again like just being tactful and um navigating that properly would be my suggestion. Though also like if you just look up my name, like I'm also like on LinkedIn if anybody has follow-up questions, because I know that we're kind of like having to wrap it up and stuff.
Yeah. Did you have like any other shout outs that you wanted to do before the end of the talk or any links to websites?
I mean, I am very active on LinkedIn, and also like on Discord. It's just like Saravia and then PT. So I'm pretty much like able to just kind of like answer to any questions there. And yeah, I think just thank you so much to SGDA for like having me. It's been a really fun summit. So good on the work and stuff.
Thank you so much for sticking for coming back. We don't have a lot of returning speakers, so it's really nice to see you again. And also for us to be able to talk one on one is a lot better than having to talk in a group and not being able to get your full experience. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.